And for more on this story, we're joined by John Lyndon. He's the executive director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, which is a network of Israeli and Palestinian organizations engaged in grassroots peace building. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. As we just saw there, this has been a very violent month in the West Bank. What has been the impact of all of this bloodshed on the possibility for peace, and how alarmed are you at the violence?
Well, quite alarmed by the violence because, as your package said, it comes on the back of the most violent year we've had since the Second Intifada just last year in 2022. The impact on any kind of peace process, well, we've had diplomacy, final status, real diplomacy, suspended since 2014 now. So this violence is coming in an atmosphere and an environment where meaningful diplomacy has ended. And that's why it's really most worrying. In previous rounds of violence, we had a very engaged international community, some sort of a structure that many people saw could point towards a two-state solution, and really the time and attention of the international community to try and not just tamp down moments of violence, but build towards a political horizon. None of those things are present right now. So this round of violence is qualitatively different to many that we've seen before. And I think finally, just looking at the weakness of the Palestinian Authority and the unprecedentedly far-right government in Israel, structurally, we don't really have as many sort of impediments to escalation than we may have had in previous rounds.
You just mentioned the Palestinian Authority. It has suspended security coordination with Israel. What exactly does that mean, and what long-term impact could that have?
So the security coordination involves the Palestinian Authority security forces who are in charge of security in Area A, which is part of the West Bank, and in Area B to a lesser extent. It involves them coordinating on a daily basis with the Israeli Defense Forces. And many senior Israeli military officials have privately credited that coordination as being the main reason that we've seen a relative decline in violence over the last decade and a half. So that coordination ending or being suspended even temporarily, it takes away one of the sort of best measures we have for stopping day-to-day escalation. The other thing that it also possibly makes more likely is some sort of a confrontation between Palestinian security forces and the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, we haven't really seen that for 2 decades, but without the day-to-day coordination, the possibility of them being in the same place at the same time and not coordinating, not being aware of each other's movements, it allows miscalculation to be more probable and escalation as a result also to be more likely.
Well, so the new hard-right government of Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged even tougher actions against Palestinians. How are the dynamics of this new government factoring in?
They're a huge part of what makes this moment so concerning. So as I mentioned, it is the furthest right government we've ever had in Israel, but we also have individuals who had previously been seen as far beyond the pale in Israeli politics, and most notably Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a national security minister, in positions of genuine power, where they get to influence day-to-day policies for the border police, for example, but also where they are attuned to the most hardline attitudes in Israeli society. So their voting base are very often the people who are calling for even more drastic measures against the Palestinians. So the worry for many of us is that if we do see a profound escalation, and I think we're already in the midst of one based upon what happened last year, the incentives of some of those people will be to push harder rather than to de-escalate. And then, of course, with the weakness of the Palestinian Authority and the lack of their real security presence in places like Jenin, you can just see that all of the raw material that you need for that escalation is there. And you can see it just incrementally, one side pushing the other. And without significant and urgent mediation, it could get out of control very, very quickly.
As we mentioned, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to visit Israel and the West Bank early next week to discuss de-escalation measures. What do you expect he will suggest? What can be done?
I expect that he'll prioritize restoring security coordination, which I'm cautiously optimistic will be achieved. As your package said, it's a measure that's been threatened before or delivered partially. So hopefully that can be put back in place. But what I really hope also we do is look beyond just de-escalation. As important as that is, the limited diplomatic focus on this conflict tends to be concentrated on ceasefires, rapid de-escalations, and then the international community kind of moves on until the next round of violence again. And we can see from all we've been discussing that all of the raw materials for a very significant conflagration are here. And what we'd love to see is people like Secretary Blinken, the European Union, other international actors, to try and sketch out a path that incrementally makes things better rather than just tries to stabilize them. A diplomatic horizon for Palestinians, which is critical, some sort of support for the Palestinian Authority, which is really in crisis materially, but perhaps most importantly, a scaled investment in civil society, support for young people that want to try and figure out a way for Israelis and Palestinians to justly and equally share the land together in peace. We haven't done that as an international community for a very, very long time. And the result is this coming generation of Israelis and Palestinians have no memory of diplomacy, total separation from one another, and are being thrust into this kind of pit of constant violent escalation without any of the tools for conflict resolution. And that's something we can do in the international community. And I hope Secretary Blinken really tries to sketch out a path and a vision that could inspire young Israelis and Palestinians and pull them away from the people in their society that are trying to force them towards enemies.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. John Lyndon, Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24.